John Harper lived a simple, quiet life in the small town of Willow Creek. He wasn't rich or famous, but he didn't need to be. His days were filled with fixing cars at his modest mechanic shop, and his evenings were reserved for family. For John, nothing mattered more than his son, Michael. At 22 years old, Michael was the light of John's life, a smart, kind-hearted young man who had dreams bigger than the little town they called home. Michael worked part-time at a local grocery store while studying business online. He wanted to open his own cafe someday, a cozy place where people could gather over coffee and share stories. To John, it felt like just yesterday when Michael was a toddler running around the house, leaving tiny handprints on every surface. Now he was all grown up, full of ambition and ready to take on the world. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It started as an ordinary Friday evening. John had closed up the garage early so he could spend some quality time with his family. They ordered pizza, watched a movie together, and laughed until their sides hurt. It was one of those perfect nights that made John feel grateful for everything he had. Before going to bed, Michael mentioned he'd step outside for a quick walk to clear his head. "Don't stay out too long," Sarah, John's wife, said with a smile. "You know how your dad worries." Michael chuckled. "I'll be fine, just need some fresh air." That was the last time they saw him alive. The next morning, panic set in when Michael didn't come home. Calls went unanswered, and his phone seemed to be switched off. John drove around town, checking all the places Michael might have gone: the foyer, park, the library, even his favorite coffee spot. But there was no sign of him. Hours turned into a sleepless night, and by Sunday afternoon the police were involved. Search parties scoured the area, retracing Michael's likely route based on witness accounts. Someone reported seeing him walking near the river late Friday night. That clue led officers to the water's edge, where they found Michael's shoes and jacket lying on the bank. Divers were called in, and after hours of searching, they recovered his body from the murky depths. The authorities concluded it was an accidental drowning. According to their report, Michael must have slipped and fallen into the river, unable to save himself. While tragic, it seemed plausible enough for everyone else, except for John. Something about the story didn't sit right with him. Michael wasn't reckless. He was cautious to a fault, always double-checking locks and wearing seatbelts religiously. Why would he go near the river alone at night? And why leave his belongings behind if he fell in accidentally? These questions swirled in John's mind day and night, keeping him awake and fueling his growing unease. Sarah tried to comfort him, saying, "We have to accept what happened, John. The police did their job. It was an accident." But acceptance wasn't something John could muster, not yet. Every instinct told him there was more to the story, something hidden beneath the surface, just like the river that claimed his son. One evening, as John sat in his workshop surrounded by tools and half-finished projects, an idea struck him. What if he could find proof? What if he could catch whoever or whatever was responsible for Michael's death? The thought terrified him, but also gave him a strange sense of purpose. If the answers weren't coming to him, maybe he needed to force them out. He remembered reading about hidden cameras used in investigations, small, discreet devices capable of recording hours of footage without drawing attention. Could he use one to uncover the truth? The idea seemed crazy, almost unhinged, but desperation can make people do things they never imagined. After days of research and careful planning, John purchased a waterproof camera designed for extreme conditions. He tested it multiple times, ensuring it worked perfectly before making his decision. Then came the hardest part, placing the camera inside Michael's coffin. It felt wrong, intrusive even, but John convinced himself it was necessary. If anyone or anything tampered with Michael's resting place, the camera would capture it. On the day of the funeral, John stood beside Sarah, holding her hand tightly as friends and neighbors offered condolences. No one suspected what lay hidden beneath the satin lining of the casket. As the ceremony ended and the coffin was lowered into the ground, John whispered a silent apology to his son. "I'm sorry, Michael," he murmured, "but I can't let this go. Not until I know the truth." Days stretched into weeks, and John waited anxiously for any sign of activity. He visited the gravesite often, pretending to pay respects while secretly checking for disturbances. Nothing seemed amiss, but he reminded himself to be patient. The camera was still recording, capturing every moment unseen and unheard. At night, John replayed scenarios in his head. What if someone came looking for evidence? What if they tried to cover up their tracks? Or worse, what if they realized the camera was there and destroyed it? Each possibility weighed heavily on him, but he clung to hope. Hope that the truth would eventually come to light, and that justice would follow close behind. Little did John know, the footage waiting underground would reveal far more than he ever anticipated. John Harper's days became a blur of sleepless nights and restless mornings. Every waking moment was consumed by thoughts of Michael, the son he had lost too soon. The grief was overwhelming. But it wasn't just sadness that kept John awake. It was doubt. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about Michael's death didn't add up. It gnawed at him like an open wound refusing to heal. Sarah, his wife, tried her best to help him move forward. She encouraged him to talk to friends, join support groups, or even see a counselor. But John couldn't bring himself to do any of those things. How could he explain to others what he couldn't fully understand himself? To everyone else, Michael's death was a tragic accident, a heartbreaking twist of fate. But to John, it felt more like a puzzle with missing pieces. He spent hours replaying the events leading up to that fateful night. Michael had seemed happy when he left the house for his walk. There were no signs of distress, no indication that anything was wrong. Yet within hours, he was gone. The police report stated that Michael must have slipped and fallen into the river, unable to swim against the current. While plausible, it didn't align with the cautious young man John knew so well. Michael had always been careful, almost overly so. As a child, he wouldn't cross the street without holding someone's hand. In high school, he refused to drive until he'd taken extra driving lessons, even though he passed his test on the first try. And now, as an adult, he carried a flashlight whenever he went out after dark, ensuring he could see where he was going. Why would such a cautious person venture close to the river alone at night? Why leave his shoes and jacket behind if he simply fell in? These questions haunted John endlessly. He began retracing Michael's steps in his mind, imagining every possible scenario. Was he meeting someone? Had he stumbled upon something or someone he wasn't supposed to see? Each new thought brought more unease, deepening his conviction that Michael's death hadn't been an accident. One evening, while sitting in his workshop, John stared blankly at the tools scattered across his workbench. His eyes landed on a small gadget he'd purchased weeks earlier, a hidden camera designed for extreme conditions. At first, buying it had felt like an impulsive decision, driven by desperation. Now it seemed like the only way to get answers. Placing the camera inside Michael's coffin had been one of the hardest things John ever did. It felt wrong, almost sacrilegious to tamper with his son's resting place. But John reminded himself why he was doing it. If there was even a slim chance of uncovering the truth, he owed it to Michael and to himself to take it. Still, guilt weighed heavily on him, especially knowing that Sarah would never understand. She believed they needed to let go and focus on healing. John wanted to heal too, but not before he knew the whole story. After the burial, John returned home, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. He tried to distract himself with chores and errands, but his mind kept drifting back to the camera. What if it captured something important? What if it showed nothing at all? The uncertainty was maddening. Days turned into weeks, and John visited the gravesite often. He told Sarah he needed time alone to grieve, which wasn't entirely untrue. Each visit filled him with conflicting emotions: sorrow over losing Michael, frustration over the lack of answers, and guilt over what he'd done. Yet despite his inner turmoil, he remained vigilant, watching for any signs of disturbance around the grave. At home, John threw himself into researching everything he could about hidden cameras and surveillance equipment. He read online forums, watched tutorials, and learned how to extract footage without damaging the device. The process fascinated him, providing a temporary escape from the pain of his loss. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of purpose. But, as time dragged on, doubt crept in again. What if the camera malfunctioned? What if no one came near the grave, leaving him with nothing but static-filled recordings? Worse still, what if someone discovered the camera and destroyed it? These fears plagued him constantly, making it hard to concentrate on anything else. To cope, John started documenting his thoughts in a journal. Writing helped him organize his racing mind and provided a safe space to express his emotions. He wrote letters to Michael, pouring out his love, regret, and determination to find the truth. Sometimes he imagined Michael replying, offering words of encouragement and understanding. These imaginary conversations gave him strength during moments of weakness. As the weeks stretched into a month, John grew increasingly impatient. He knew he couldn't wait much longer to retrieve the camera. Delaying meant risking damage from weather or potential discovery by cemetery staff. But digging up a grave wasn't something he could do alone. It required careful planning and someone trustworthy enough to keep his secret. That's when he thought of Tom, an old friend who worked as a handyman in town. Tom had known John since childhood and had always been dependable. More importantly, he understood the value of discretion. One afternoon, John invited Tom over under the pretense of needing help with a plumbing issue. Over coffee, he cautiously broached the subject of Michael's death and his suspicions surrounding it. Tom listened intently, his expression shifting from shock to sympathy. When John revealed his plan to exhume the coffin and retrieve the camera, Tom hesitated. "This is serious stuff, John," he said finally. "You're talking about breaking laws here. Are you sure this is worth it?" John nodded firmly. "I have to know, Tom. I can't live with this uncertainty anymore. If there's even a chance of finding out what really happened to Michael, I have to take it." After a long pause, Tom agreed to help. Together, they devised a plan to dig up the coffin late at night, avoiding detection by covering their tracks carefully. The thought of disturbing Michael's resting place filled John with dread, but he pushed through, reminding himself of the bigger picture. This wasn't about invading his son's peace. It was about giving him justice. The night they chose was cold and moonless, perfect for staying hidden. Armed with shovels, gloves, and flashlights, John and Tom drove to the cemetery under the cover of darkness. Their movements were swift yet deliberate, each shovel of dirt bringing them closer to the truth. Despite the chill in the air, sweat dripped down John's face as adrenaline coursed through his veins. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the coffin. Carefully prying it open, John retrieved the camera, his hands trembling with a mix of relief and apprehension. They quickly reburied the coffin, erasing any evidence of their intrusion before slipping away unnoticed. Back at home, John connected the camera to his computer, his heart hammering in his chest. Would the footage reveal something significant? Or would it leave him empty-handed, forcing him to confront the possibility that Michael's death truly was an accident? As the screen flickered to life, John braced himself for whatever lay ahead. Whatever the outcome, he knew one thing for certain. He was closer to the truth than ever before. John sat in his dimly lit workshop, the glow of his computer screen casting shadows across his face. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked play on the video file retrieved from the hidden camera. The room was eerily quiet except for the faint hum of the computer fan and the occasional creak of the old wooden floor beneath his chair. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for what he might see, or might not see. The footage began with nothing but darkness. For several minutes, all John could make out was the faint outline of the coffin's interior, illuminated only by the tiny red light of the camera. It felt surreal, almost haunting, to watch the stillness of Michael's final resting place. John's heart sank momentarily, wondering if this entire effort had been in vain. But then, just as doubt started creeping in, something shifted. A faint noise broke the silence, a rustling sound, barely audible at first but growing louder. It was the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on dry grass. John leaned closer to the screen, his pulse quickening. Two figures emerged into view, their silhouettes distorted by the low resolution of the camera. They moved cautiously, glancing around as though fearful of being seen. One of them carried a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating parts of the grave. John's stomach churned as he watched them begin digging. Their movements were hurried, almost frantic, as if they were racing against time. Dirt flew in clumps, piling up beside the freshly disturbed earth. John clenched his fists, anger bubbling inside him. These weren't mourners paying respects, or cemetery workers performing maintenance. Whoever these people were, they had come here with a purpose, and it wasn't honorable. After what felt like an eternity, the two men reached the coffin. With surprising ease, they pried it open using crowbars. John flinched at the sight, his mind screaming protests. How dare they disturb Michael like this? Who gave them the right? But he forced himself to stay focused, knowing that every second of this footage could hold answers. The taller of the two men leaned over the coffin, shining the flashlight directly inside. His companion joined him, and together they began rifling through its contents. At first, John thought they were searching for valuables, jewelry perhaps, or other personal items buried with Michael. But then one of them pulled something small and shiny from the lining of the coffin. It looked like a flash drive, no bigger than a thumb. The man examined it closely before slipping it into his pocket. John froze, his blood running cold. A flash drive? Why would Michael have a flash drive, hidden in his coffin? And why would someone go to such lengths to retrieve it? The implications hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't random vandalism or grave robbery. These men weren't after valuables. They were after information. Whatever was on that flash drive must be important enough to kill for. As the two intruders finished their search, they quickly closed the coffin and began covering it with dirt again. Their faces remained partially obscured, but John recognized them instantly. They were locals, men known for their involvement in petty crimes around Willow Creek. One of them, a wiry guy named Carl, had a reputation for dealing drugs. The other, a burly man called Ray, often acted as muscle for shady operations. Seeing them confirmed John's worst fears. Michael hadn't stumbled upon an accident. He'd uncovered something dangerous. Once the men left, disappearing into the night as quietly as they'd arrived, the footage returned to silence. John sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by what he'd just witnessed. His mind raced with questions. What was on that flash drive? How did Michael end up with it? And most importantly, who else knew about it? For a long time, John stared at the paused image on the screen, the last frame showing the retreating backs of the two men. He felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a flicker of hope. Hope because now he had proof that Michael's death wasn't an accident, proof that someone had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks, and proof that justice might still be within reach. But with proof came responsibility. John knew he couldn't keep this to himself. Yet reporting, it meant exposing his own actions, digging up Michael's grave, tampering with evidence, breaking laws. Would anyone understand why he'd done it? Or would they see him as reckless, even criminal? The thought weighed heavily on him, but he pushed it aside. Right now, the priority was ensuring the truth came out. He copied the footage onto a USB drive, taking care to preserve the original file. Then he drafted a detailed account of everything he'd done, from placing the camera in the coffin to retrieving it. He included timestamps, descriptions of the intruders, and his suspicions about their motives. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking outside, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. Exhaustion tugged at him, but he couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. John decided to share the footage anonymously, at least initially. He uploaded it to a secure cloud service and sent links to two recipients: Detective Harris, the lead investigator on Michael's case, and Emily Carter, a journalist known for her investigative work in uncovering corruption in Willow Creek. Both were trustworthy, in their own ways, and capable of handling sensitive information responsibly. To Detective Harris, John wrote a brief message. This, Footage proves my son's death was not an accident. Please investigate further. To Emily Carter, he added a plea for discretion. I trust you to use this responsibly. My family's safety depends on it. With the emails sent, John finally allowed himself to exhale. For the first time since losing Michael, he felt a sense of control. He didn't know what would happen next, whether the authorities would act, whether the footage would lead to arrests. But he had done everything in his power to ensure the truth couldn't stay buried. Later that day, as John stood by Michael's gravesite once more, he whispered a promise to his son. I won't let them get away with this, Michael. I'll make sure everyone knows what really happened to you. The wind rustled the leaves overhead, carrying his words away like a silent vow. Though the road ahead was uncertain, John knew one thing for sure. The fight for justice had only just begun. The days following John Harper's decision to share the footage were a whirlwind of anticipation and anxiety. He knew he had taken a significant risk by sending the video to Detective Harris and journalist Emily Carter, but deep down, he felt it was the right thing to do. Now all he could do was wait and hope that someone would take action. Detective Harris was the first to respond. Within 24 hours of receiving the email, he showed up at John's doorstep unannounced. The detective was a seasoned investigator, with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Mr. Harper, he began, his tone firm but not unkind. I need you to explain how you obtained this footage. John hesitated, knowing this moment would come. He invited the detective inside and sat him down in the living room. Then, with a heavy heart, he recounted everything, the hidden camera, the late-night exhumation, and his reasons for doing it. As he spoke, he watched Harris's expression shift from skepticism to understanding. When John finished, the detective leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. This is complicated, Harris admitted. You broke several laws retrieving this evidence, but I'll give you credit. It's compelling. If what we see here is accurate, then your son's death wasn't an accident. It was murder. Those words sent a chill down John's spine. Hearing them aloud made the situation real in a way he hadn't fully grasped before. Murder. Someone had killed Michael, and now, thanks to John's risky actions, they might finally have a chance to catch them. Meanwhile, journalist Emily Carter also reached out. Unlike Harris, she approached the situation cautiously, asking questions without making accusations. She wanted to verify the authenticity of the footage and understand its context before publishing anything. John appreciated her professionalism. She wasn't looking to exploit the story for clicks. She genuinely cared about uncovering the truth. As both Harris and Carter dug deeper into the case, old wounds reopened in Willow Creek. The town, once peaceful and tight-knit, now buzzed with whispers and speculation. People wondered why anyone would desecrate a grave, or why Michael Harper's death suddenly mattered so much. Some blamed John for stirring up trouble, while others sympathized with his quest for answers. Back at the police station, Detective Harris reviewed the footage multiple times, analyzing every detail. He identified the two men, Carl and Ray, from John's description and cross-referenced their criminal records. Both had ties to illegal activities, including drug trafficking and petty theft. This aligned with John's theory that Michael had stumbled upon something dangerous. But what exactly had Michael discovered? That question led investigators to examine his personal belongings more closely. During the initial investigation, authorities hadn't found anything unusual in Michael's phone or laptop. However, one overlooked item caught their attention: a notebook filled with cryptic notes and sketches. At first glance, it seemed like random doodles, but upon closer inspection, detectives realized it contained detailed observations about suspicious vehicles and individuals frequenting certain areas of town. It turned out Michael had been documenting patterns, not just any patterns, but those linked to a local drug ring operating under the radar. The flash drive stolen from his coffin likely contained even more incriminating evidence, possibly photos, documents, or recordings that directly implicated key players in the operation. Armed with this new information, Detective Harris assembled a task force to investigate further. They began surveilling Carl and Ray, tracking their movements and monitoring their communications. Meanwhile, Emily Carter worked tirelessly to piece together her own version of events. Through interviews with anonymous sources and meticulous research, she uncovered a web of corruption involving not only low-level criminals but also influential figures in Willow Creek, business owners, politicians, and even law enforcement officers. As the investigation gained momentum, tensions rose. Those involved in the drug ring grew paranoid, sensing they were being watched. Threats circulated quietly, warning anyone who dared speak out against them. John received a chilling phone call late one night, a distorted voice telling him to back off if he valued his family's safety. Shaken but undeterred, John installed security cameras around his house and kept a close eye on Sarah and their routines. He refused to let fear dictate his actions. Finally, after weeks of relentless effort, the breakthrough came. Authorities traced the stolen flash drive to a safe house owned by one of the drug ring's leaders. A raid conducted in the early hours of the morning yielded damning evidence: financial records, incriminating messages, and surveillance photos implicating dozens of people. Among them were Carl and Ray, whose panicked confessions during interrogation sealed the fate of the entire operation. News of the arrests spread quickly, shocking the residents of Willow Creek. No one had suspected such widespread corruption existed in their quiet little town. For John, however, the revelations brought a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief because justice was finally within reach, and sorrow because it confirmed what he'd feared all along. Michael had died trying to expose the truth. In the aftermath, Emily Carter published an exposé detailing the investigation, highlighting Michael's bravery and John's determination to uncover the truth. Her article sparked outrage and calls for accountability, prompting state officials to launch a broader inquiry into corruption across the region. Thanks to Michael's courage and John's persistence, countless lives would be spared from falling victim to the same dangers. For John, the journey wasn't easy. He faced legal consequences for his role in tampering with the grave, though the charges were eventually reduced given the circumstances. More importantly, he earned the respect of many in the community who saw him as a symbol of resilience and justice. One evening, as John stood beside Michael's grave, he felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. The pain of losing his son would never fully disappear, but knowing that Michael's legacy lived on through the changes he inspired gave John strength. He whispered softly, "You did good, son. Real good." The wind rustled gently, carrying his words away. In that moment, John knew he had honored Michael's memory in the best way possible, by ensuring his voice was heard, even from beyond the grave. The months following the arrests brought a mix of emotions for John Harper. On one hand, there was relief, a deep, almost overwhelming sense that justice had finally been served. The men responsible for Michael's death were behind bars, and the drug ring that had operated in Willow Creek for years was dismantled. But on the other hand, there was still an emptiness inside him, a void left by the loss of his son that no amount of closure could ever fill. John tried to focus on the positive changes that had come from exposing the truth. Emily Carter's exposé had not only shed light on the corruption in their small town, but also sparked statewide reforms. Law enforcement agencies implemented stricter oversight, and community members became more vigilant about reporting suspicious activities. People often approached John at the mechanic shop or during his walks around town to thank him for what he'd done. "Your son was a hero," they would say, their voices tinged with admiration and sorrow. "And so are you." While those words brought some comfort, John couldn't help feeling like he didn't deserve them. He replayed every decision he'd made over the past few months, the hidden camera, the exhumation, the risks he'd taken, and wondered if he'd gone too far. Was it right to disturb Michael's resting place? Would Michael have approved of what he did? These questions lingered in his mind, haunting him even as others praised his bravery. Sarah, John's wife, struggled with her own feelings about everything that had happened. At first, she had been furious when she learned about the camera and the secret excavation. "How could you do something like that?" she had asked, tears streaming down her face. "You disturbed our son's peace." It took time, patience, and countless conversations before she began to understand why John had felt compelled to act. Slowly, they found a way to heal together, leaning on each other and remembering Michael not just as a victim but as someone who had stood up for what was right. As winter gave way to spring, John decided to channel his energy into something meaningful. He started volunteering at a local support group for families affected by violent crimes. Many of the participants were parents who, like him, had lost children under tragic circumstances. Listening to their stories helped John realize he wasn't alone in his grief, and that sharing his experience might offer hope to others. During one meeting, a young mother named Lisa shared how her teenage daughter had been killed in a hit-and-run accident. The driver, a wealthy businessman, had used his influence to avoid charges. Lisa's voice cracked as she spoke about the frustration and helplessness she felt. Afterward, John approached her privately. "I know it's hard," he said gently, "but don't give up. Sometimes the truth takes time to come out. Keep fighting for your daughter." Lisa looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means a lot." In that moment, John realized he had a purpose beyond his own pain. By helping others navigate their journeys toward justice, he could honor Michael's memory in a way that mattered. In addition to volunteering, John threw himself into advocacy work. He partnered with Emily Carter and several local organizations to push for stronger laws protecting whistleblowers and victims' families. Together, they organized workshops, fundraisers, and awareness campaigns aimed at preventing similar tragedies in the future. The community rallied behind these efforts, eager to ensure that Michael's sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. One particularly memorable event was a memorial ceremony held in Michael's honor. Friends, family, and even strangers gathered at the park where Michael used to spend hours reading and sketching. They planted a tree in his name, its branches stretching skyward as a symbol of growth and resilience. John stood beside Sarah, holding her hand tightly as speakers shared heartfelt tributes. When it was his turn to speak, John took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. "Michael was my son," he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "But he was also so much more than that. He was kind, curious, and brave. Qualities we should all strive to embody. He saw injustice and refused to look away even when it put him in danger. I wish I could tell him how proud I am of him today. But since I can't, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure his courage inspires others." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the park like a promise to carry Michael's legacy forward. For the first time in a long while, John allowed himself to smile, not because the pain was gone, but because he knew Michael's story would continue to make a difference. As the seasons changed again, John found solace in simple routines. He returned to fixing cars, finding peace in the rhythmic hum of tools and the satisfaction of solving mechanical problems. On weekends, he visited Michael's grave, bringing fresh flowers and sitting quietly for a while. During those visits, he talked to Michael as though he were still there, sharing updates about the family, recounting funny moments from work, and expressing his love. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled around him, John noticed something unusual. Near the headstone, a small envelope lay propped against the base, sealed with a sticker shaped like a coffee cup. Curious, he picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Harper, my name is Anna, and I'm part of the support group. You visit sometimes. Your story has given me strength to keep fighting for justice for my brother. Thank you for reminding me that even in the darkest times, we can find light. This is for Michael." Attached to the note was a gift card to Michael's favorite cafe. John smiled through tears, touched by the gesture. It was proof that Michael's legacy was reaching people in ways he hadn't imagined. Over time, John came to accept that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding balance. He learned to cherish the happy memories of Michael without letting the sadness consume him. He celebrated milestones like Michael's birthday with laughter instead of tears, and he kept the journal he'd started after Michael's death, filling its pages with reflections, gratitude, and dreams for the future. On the anniversary of Michael's passing, John visited the gravesite once more. This time, he didn't bring flowers or gifts. Instead, he carried a small wooden box containing mementos, photos, notes, and a copy of the exposé written by Emily Carter. Placing the box gently beside the headstone, he knelt down and whispered, "This is for you, Michael. Everything we've done, it's all because of you. I miss you every day, but I promise to keep moving forward. For you." As he stood to leave, a soft breeze rustled the trees, carrying with it a sense of calm. John glanced back one last time, feeling a renewed determination to live fully and honor Michael's memory in everything he did. Life had changed him in ways he never expected, but it had also shown him the power of perseverance, love, and hope. And so, John Harper's story became one of transformation, a testament to the strength of a father's love and the enduring impact of a son's courage. Though the road ahead would always hold challenges, John walked it with purpose, knowing that Michael's light would guide him every step of the way.